So I hope everyone's had a chance to, if you haven't, take a look at the notes for today. So I'm not going to go through the different updates for the different teams. Are we looking at the right notes? April notes. So they're just reordered. Smart. That was one of the recommendations for the comms team. So just as a bit of an anticipatory set, we're going to talk a lot about finance today. It's not that anything's wrong or not going well. It's just that where we are in the work of getting additional support for the organization as a response to COVID, that will give us a lot of flexibility moving forward if we're able to kind of accomplish some things. So we're going to update everyone on that. And then we broke out the decisions for the first time this time from decisions made that we need to communicate to decisions that are pending to be made that we may be interested in some feedback about. And lastly, the input question that Rawa emailed around. Did everyone get a chance to see the input question? I am going to go ahead and move the gallery. There we go. Yes. I'm in the office, as you see, and I put you all on gallery view. It's really interesting to see how scruffy people get when they don't have to be in person all the time. And then there's Jay, who looks like a model. So what's going on, Jay? Everybody else is like in their home look. And Jay.
This is the most home look you can have. It's a blanket. I have swaddled myself.
Jay being swaddled. And good repping for those of you wearing your partner's swag. Represent. So I don't know how much, if you've had a chance to read through all the emails we've been sitting around about this stuff, but we thought it'd be really important to make sure the entire staff knew what we were up to in terms of the COVID stuff and the CARES Act plan. So the federal government passed the CARES Act. In it are a number of things that can strengthen the organization financially if we manage to get the opportunity. The two that we spent about a week and a half getting the board's concurrence with are the two that we're going to talk a little bit about today. The payroll protection plan piece is designed to keep small businesses functioning by actually basically giving a loan to those organizations for the payroll of the organizations for the month of May and June. And the amount of which you spend on that toward payroll and other business operating costs that are legitimate, the entire loan will be forgiven, right? And so this is a way to literally get May and June fully, mostly paid for. And it's really the government's attempt to sustain small businesses during this time where they know business development and normal functioning is really not possible. And they don't want anyone laid off if they don't have to be. And this is a way to keep people from being laid off. Because we have access to Gates resources and they've given us the flexibility to spend them earlier than we intended to, the layoff option wasn't really on the table for us. But, this program allows us to preserve the dollars intended for next year, and to sustain the organization's work during this time. So we put an application in for the payroll protection plan. We haven't heard yet, but and it looks like that program has run out of money according to the government. We haven't gotten a denial. Other orgs have gotten denials. So what we're hoping for is our bank is making its way through all of the applications that are received, and we'll and we'll eventually get a notice from them saying, send us this information and you're all good. As I mentioned, the PPP plan is fully forgivable as a loan. And the amount that's a loan has a very low interest rate, 1%, right? And so if it happens that we get that money and we don't spend it on the things that they would forgive, it's still a better deal than any other sort of a dollar beyond a grant would be, for our work. And so we're still excited about that. The likelihood is low at this point, I think. Wouldn't you say, Chris?
Which likelihood?
PPP.
The likelihood of what?
Of us getting a grant through them right now.
It's still almost guaranteed, because if Congress doesn't, the whole plan originally was for Congress to continue to allocate dollars to fund the PPP. If they don't, you can imagine some members of Congress being burned at the stake.
So you figure even if they run out of money, they'll provide more money.
It's explicitly what they said when they originally funded it. The current OMB estimate of what they need to put in is about $1.2 trillion. Currently, they put in $350 million. The next funding tranche is supposed to be $250 billion, and they're going to have to put in at least another $500 billion to fully fund it.
So then it's just a question of when, potentially.
Well.
Right. So the second program is it's different. It's actually a loan. At this point, there's no sense of it being forgivable, even though there's talk about it potentially being forgivable. The terms are also very low. There's a 2.5 percentage rate for nonprofits, and the loan's term is 30 years. So you have a long time in which to pay it back. So we got the okay to apply for it. It's through the Small Business Administration. And we've made it past the first tranche because they reached out and asked us to register on their website and to link up some other materials to demonstrate our qualifications, and we've accomplished that. So the likelihood is those dollars will make their way to us at some point too. But that's a pure loan. It's, like I said, better terms than a loan we currently have from Wells Fargo, and we have a very long time to pay it off. Also intended to sustain organizations during this period of time when districts and their clients aren't able to contract, and are maybe being super slow to pay, which we have at least one of them who is Mallory, and so we want to make sure that we can sustain ourselves during this kind of tricky, tough time. Without both of these pieces of work, these resources, we're expecting to have a little bit less than $1 million in the bank at the end of the fiscal year at our current burn rate, even including the addition of the program manager, the Gates program manager role, going forward. With these two programs, if one or the other come, you can just add the total to what that number would be. So it essentially positions us better than we really ever have been for next year's work, because we'll have greater than $1 million in hand that we can use to execute against next year. God willing, the creek don't rise. School districts, start being excited about contracting again, and we can get our MOUs and everything sort of queued up. But on the instance that it slips way into the fall, we'll still be okay and still be covered. The next Gates tranche, assuming that we get our MOUs and our data agreements in place, which are the only two criteria. Third criteria was that we choose two districts, which we've done. That tranche of dollars is expected in November, right? And that's a $2.8 million tranche at that point. And so essentially 3/4 of the school year of our fiscal year will be resourced between the dollars we'll have on hand and the new Gates tranche, assuming we're able to get those MOUs and everything lined up and signed up. It's just then a question of the loan and other dollars to sustain us through the contracting pieces that we still need to accomplish going forward. We're also in the process on two different audits. We got the 18-19 audit back, and it's going before the board for board review of the audit committee next week. There's nothing, it's a clean audit, as they say, which means there's no, craziness and no problems with it, which is nice. Given all the rebuilding we've had to do about finances and everything, it's really good news. We're also in the process of auditing the prior 403B plan, because if you remember, there was a period of time when the organization wasn't appropriately managing those resources and making the necessary shifts and changes that we should have to keep the dollars on track for people. So we didn't know this, but we were responsible for auditing that program anyway every year because it had reached the threshold of number of participants that requires a kind of, performer audit. And so we're having an audit done on the prior 3 years of the 403B, and if there's any implications for individuals, you'll hear about that specifically. The only thing, I think we've made everyone in the org right now already whole based upon the analysis that we've done in the past. The question is going to be whether folks who weren't in the org when we did that, if we still have something we need to do for those people going forward. And that audit will help us kind of understand that. And then, of course, we're in the process of planning next year. We're looking at a level of effort that is about the same as this year, but with some growth, right? Which means the work that's growing are the networks, not the intensives, because otherwise we would be financially in trouble. Because if you have the same budget with growth, you should have more money, presumably. But it's our products that are more scalable that are growing, and essentially it's the Gates networks are representing most of the growth that we're talking about now. There are also a series of other projects that Chris and I and Cynthia and team are running down that might result in some additional hires for the organization if those pieces land. But because of COVID, we don't know how whether they're all on track, whether they'll still happen in the time frames that the folks originally expected. But we're hopeful, and we're processing all that work going forward. Any questions about finances? Let me check the list. Elise, any questions come through the chat?
No questions there.
Okay, so we should attend. All right. So a couple of decisions. So as I mentioned, we spent a bunch of time getting the board comfortable with us applying for these things, and they gave us the permission. We also made a decision about performance reviews, as you know. A lot of the data that would go in our performance reviews would either be different because of what's happened with COVID or not be in evidence in terms of the test score data, et cetera. And so, the STR data is going to be lensed differently too, because we can't measure everything we'd intended to measure. And so we decided we can't execute performance reviews the way that we had originally planned, and which is part of our responsibility to you as team members, is for you to be clear about what you're going to be accountable for, and for us to be coherently executing against that plan. We also, though, realize that we care about, reflection. We care about ROCE. We care about all of you knowing what's working, what's not, having the data you need to professionally grow, that are also part of this process. And so we're in the process now of reconceptualizing what we might do in order to still be the learning organization that we want to be. And yet, make sure that no one's being held accountable for data that they don't have, right? So stay tuned on that front because Chris and team are going to come up with a plan, and then we'll share what that is subsequently, probably via email. In addition to that, as you know, we were already in the process of revising our performance, plan process. And so Rawa and team are going to continue on that process too. So at some point, when all of the dust has settled and we're back to whatever our new normal for business is going to be after this, because I anticipate a lot less kissy and handshaking in our future. We'll have a robust performance management project that's built within the right platforms, and all the data and privacies and things will be, coherent and in place. So the project for doing that is still on track, even though we're going to do something different in this current iteration for this year. And in terms of the two decisions that are pending, we're still waiting to figure out how we should communicate the two awards to the two Gates networks. We had a huge plan to partner with the consultants that Gates gave us access to and to create a launch communication piece, press release, maybe even a meeting with event, that kind of thing, in each system. And it doesn't make sense to do what we had originally planned because of what's happening with COVID and the schools physically being closed and all related things. The intent was for the wind to be at our backs, right? And for the participants to be psyched that they actually were the ones chosen and be, kind of excited and open about talking about the opportunity and communicating it. And so much of that can happen the same way that we were conceptualizing it. And the timing for it is really sticky. So we're still trying to figure out what needs to happen, right, on that front. The other decision has to do with the org effectiveness survey. So we just had a longish conversation in the, leading a partner session about this. It also doesn't make sense to continue with the performance, the org effectiveness survey, the way we've always done it right now in this particular context too. But we still have decided that we need to do something. And so we're in the process of determining both when we can do a good, robust org effectiveness survey, to how we might actually take this opportunity to do a deep dive on the experience of the organization, of individuals in it during COVID, so that we can learn from how we're adapting or not, or how we should adapt given the current context, from the perspective of each of you as individuals and how you're actually learning, so kind of living in this work. So you'll hear about an idea for doing that later, a sort of post-check kind of thing that we're talking about in the next couple of weeks or so. But the goal being, so much is different that the way we had always done this and looking at the trends of data over time by department and by function, the current context makes that not really attributable in the same way. And so it wouldn't be a best practice to continue in the same way. Any questions on any of those decision pieces? And I think I saw a couple come through, Elise.
Yeah, there were two questions. First question was, what are the other grantees doing? And the second question is, what is Gates recommending?
Yeah. So Brian, have you had any connect with the either Gates or the contractors about what's happening in the intervening time?
We're basically waiting for programmatic discussions to happen before we really dive into the topic of press work. Yeah, we would be asking them, whether they want to participate, and if so, how, and if both are pretty well aligned in both how they want to do it and timing wise, then we could go forward. The idea was to basically do offer Ed Week an exclusive and then branch out to other national outlets and local outlets. And if that doesn't come to be, but one is still ready to go, we could go with a more localized story.
Sorry, this is Alex. That was my question. I meant more specifically the other grantees. Like, we're not the only one who needs to do a press release. So just wondering what their other organizations.
Chris, any conversations with Gates folk about?
Yeah, and they were explicit about it. I mean, we meet with them every week, the communications team, which is both the contractors, this big ad firm, but also the Gates person in charge of communication. And so they've really shifted their investment around communication to be about what we want and we need. So that's what they're doing with every single grantee now, is what can advance your work and advance your visibility. And so they're literally like tailoring their communication support around each grantee's needs and what the partners need. And people have different and complex relationships, multiple districts, chunks of a big district. And so, so they really are tailoring their support, and they're listening to us about when to go forward. If we're ready, then they're ready. And that's the same communication they're giving to all the grantees.
But I guess then we don't know exactly how, any of the other folks are communicating.
We can certainly ask. I mean, there are sharing like little bits and pieces, is that some people are just expanding existing. Right. And so that's a much easier story. They're already in a deep relationship with somebody, and it's just about adding more schools. So it's about building additional capacity. But there are other grantees like us who are working with multiple different districts. And so it's really the Brian shared, right? If there's like both sort of alignment of interest and temporal alignment, that they're willing to move forward at something close to the same time, it would be more powerful to have both of our districts actually talk about the work, particularly if we want national press coverage. But if they're not ready, we're not going to try to push them. We'll go with a regional strategy, respecting where the districts are.
Yeah. I just realized we did make another decision, and we didn't put in the list. Rahul, are you on? Yes, you're on. I see you there. In growth team, we decided to concentrate on LA for cultivation, and to sort of put Mississippi on a later sort of burn cycle with the possibility of lateraling with a different funder, so the work can be different. It doesn't have to be a Gates and SI. And so there's lots of consequences to that choice. One thing Chris and I talked about was to kind of wait a little bit before we put Mississippi on that later burn until LA kind of gets more solid, because we don't want to end up with nobody in the pipe. But that allows us to start planning what execution might look like in collaboration with a potential group, rather than trying to hold what could be two competing, sort of ways of working and ways of thinking about the work going forward. And we needed that clarity at this point in the process. So Rahul, can you take a minute when you get a sec to update the decisions made to include that one, so that people have it as an evidentiary base for later? And folks can ask questions about that too, if you have any, before we go to the input question. Any questions come in the chat? Elise? No, good. All right, the input question has been added. What are the advantages of and opportunities in working in a purely tech environment? And how are you leveraging these new ways of working? What practices or strategies should we keep even after COVID crisis is over? This question came up in a conversation with a funder also that Becky and I had, that there are some things that actually seem to work a little bit better in this context. Access to principals, for instance, and for the principal network is something that the folks in Philly talked about. And so what are some things that this tech work is actually making easier, or the doing of it is better in this context, and that we might want to keep even after we don't have to work this way? And how are you experiencing this new sort of, I hope, temporary normal? And just raise your hand and chime out and speak up when I call on you if you have something to say. I think I can see everybody. Nope, I can't see everybody. See just about everybody.
I don't know if it's better as much as just that I think it's pushed us to how we can deliver and still deliver high quality content that's asynchronous. So I think we've always just trusted that convening people, and because partners people do that, like the relational piece so well, that you could only achieve that by the larger network convenings or by dropping by a school. And I think that we are slowly learning that there's still ways of being able to deliver in this case, and that could still help moving forward, especially if we find ourselves, short-staffed at some point, or that we really want to differentiate the type of support that we're giving some schools. So.
Mm-hmm.
I think for me, a real positive has been the amount of free resources that are being made available right now. For example, there was supposed to be School Foundation was supposed to be hosting a conference last week, and everything went virtual. And with the virtual conference, all of the breakout sessions were free. And so I was able to attend a couple of those that were really helpful, and I likely would not have been able to do that because we would have had to pay to be there. So the free resources have been awesome.
Becky, while you're on, tell folks about Fordham.
Oh, yep. So Derek and I had a conversation with Fordham Street Foundation. Judy Bigelow is the program officer there, executive director, earlier this week. And beyond letting us know that any reporting for this year is no longer needed, she committed to another $65,000 for next year without any kind of additional grant application needed. So kudos to all of us. I think I actually got emotional on the phone. I hope she didn't see that, but it just showed like how much faith people have in the work that we do and how amazing the work that you all do is. And so it was pretty exciting. So congratulations to all of us on that, and had so many kind words to say about the work that we do. So
Pretty amazing. Others, how are you experiencing this norm?
Can you guys hear me? It's Emily.
Yep.
Hi, Derek. So I had two things. One is like in thinking about data and experience, just the sort of qualitative data that's coming in about teacher experience with virtual, but definitely students and families. There's a potential data repository there that with families in particular that I think could be tapped into. And then the other thing is around collaborative structures, collaboration, and being able to think outside the box. Everybody doesn't have, like certain grade levels don't all have lunch at the same time. And so there's possibilities to have different groups of folks together at sites, which is really exciting.
So Sean and I were both on the NSI equity call this week. And like I was super interested in the content, but I was also super interested in like design principles. And it was amazing to see how they like were really intentional about building in time to build relationships. And so I kind of have been jumping in on webinars, just not only for the content, but also how are different people leveraging their spaces to build those relationships. So I walked away with some great ideas. But doing breakout groups, we did constructivist listening and dyads. So just kind of also sitting in on these free webinars, not just for content, but also ideas has been pretty awesome. And then it also makes me think we have amazing relationships. So just how do we continue to leverage those as we're in this virtual space?
I can go next. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, this is Jacqueline. I want to piggyback off what Emily was saying. This past week, well, actually the last couple of weeks, I've been doing professional development, and typically I have to do it by their prep schedule. And this has allowed me to work with multiple grade levels all at the same time. And so, you miss that person-to-person experience, but it gave a different experience, and I actually think it was worthwhile. They were laughing. They gave a huge shout out to me in their staff meeting. So I think they enjoyed hearing things a little differently and working with other people. And then, so that's at the school site. And then as far as partners goes, because I'm able to collaborate, I think more efficiently because of this. I'm not waiting for lunch schedules and prep schedules. I have a little bit more time. And so I've been able to connect and work with other team members in the org, which has just expanded my knowledge greatly with the way we do things. And I'm just thoroughly enjoying it. So.
Wonderful. Other thoughts for the good of the order?
This is a quick one, but I think more people will be willing to meet with us virtually afterwards. So to get a quick coaching meeting taken care of, now I can say, hop on a hangout with me, and that's not a completely ridiculous ask.
Yeah. Accessibility. Is everyone finding that it's easier to get to people? Or are there some people that's still really hard to get?
No, I think it's easier. Derek, I have one to add as well about like during this time, I think one thing I've enjoyed is trying to give myself exposure to different platforms. So like Nearpod and Miro and some other types of collaborative spaces. Just learning about new ways to facilitate virtually, I think, is a good key learning.
Yeah. Someone else was trying to chime in when I was using my big mouth.
The help desk requests for work from home hardware needs have allowed me to finally wrestle MVP in the support system back from Elise. So that's good.
I'm pretty sure Elise is happy not having to do that. Yeah. Right. Any other thoughts before the good of the order? Because we were late on time.
Yeah, I just want to make a quick comment. Friendly reminder that there is a virtual open enrollment for the benefits meeting for anyone that wants to know more about benefits. And then just another friendly reminder to please select your benefits by the 24th and ADP. Let me know if you have any questions.
If we're at friendly reminder time, if you have not signed up for any of the math internal development, please sign up. Make sure your name is not crossed out. So I remember to send you a calendar invite by Monday. I'm working on developing them. I'm really excited to do this. I hope you guys are too.
All right. Good to see everybody. Smiley faces. Oh, is someone trying to come in?
And partners dog pictures. Please send them to Mallory and I.
So Milton and I can make the dogs.
Doing a calendar?
Yes. We got a really cute dog picture from Sean, so thank you, Sean.